If you've ever raised chickens, you've probably had a similar experience to me where the first time you go into your feed store, you're looking at all the different options with a little bit of confusion. What is the difference between a chick feed and a layer feed, or even a broiler feed for that matter? And when do you make the transition? What's in each of these feeds? All these questions that I had, and even now, having had chickens for many, many years, I still have a lot of questions. So in order to get some clarification on all this confusion, I've gone to an expert, Dr. Biggs, with the Purina team. He's been with Purina for over a decade. He has his degree in animal science and is their nutrition specialist. So he knows everything about what goes into these feeds at Purina and is going to explain some of the differences between all of them. If you've ever had any questions about chicken feed, this video is for you. Let's dive in. Dr. Biggs, thank you so much for being here today. I've got all these questions and I'm really excited to have an actual expert on the call. You have been in the poultry world for over 20 years, been working with Purina for 10, specifically in the poultry side, the backyard poultry. And so really excited to have you on. Thank you for your time. What I really want to just dive into is the difference between laying feeds and chick feeds for those that are getting started. So can you just start by giving us some of the ingredients, differences between those two, and what's in chicken feed?
For the most part, the ingredients that are going to be in the feed are really the same. Primarily corn and soybean meal based feeds. There might be some wheat products mixed in there, some distillers grains, and then all of the vitamins and minerals that the birds are going to need in there. Now, we manufacture feed at quite a few different plants throughout the country. And so they all use slightly different ingredients to kind of get to that final thing. But I mean, the one nice thing about our products is even though the plants may be using slightly different ingredients, like the nutrition is going to be always the same. Like it's always, your starter feed is always 18% protein. The vitamins, the minerals, all of those are going to be uniform across all of the plants, regardless of what ingredients they're using to make that. Now, where you get into some of your differences between the starter feed and the layer feed, primarily that's going to be calcium, just because the young birds don't need that calcium, and then the laying hens need a much higher percentage of calcium. So your starter diets are going to be around 1% calcium. A laying hen diet is going to be around 3.5% calcium. So that's the big difference. There's smaller differences. The protein levels, 18% for the starter, 16 for the layer. Some of the vitamins and minerals, the amino acids and that things are slightly different because the goal of those animals is going to be different. With your starter feed, your goal is to raise that bird into an adult chicken. So there's a lot of growth and development that goes on in there. So, early on, it's a lot of the proteins, the amino acids, things that are going to create new body tissues. Those are important, especially those first couple of weeks. It's all about generating the building blocks to make that chicken grow and provide her with muscles and feathers and bones and all of those things that are growing. We've got to put the nutrition in, provide her with those building blocks. And that's why that's very important early on. Now, as she starts to get a little older, still in that starter phase, it starts about 6-7 weeks of age that it really transitions more from that protein amino acid requirement being important to more energy, because now her body is grown, she's gotten a little larger. Now she needs more calories just to maintain her body size and continue that growth. Her rapid rate of growth is starting to slow. And so now we just need to maintain that bird and keep her healthy so she can do that kind of slow growth to get to egg production. So there's a bit of a transition there. And then once they get to, 18 weeks, get to that laying stage, they're really done growing. They're going to start laying eggs at that point. So, the demand shifts a little. They still need a little more nutrition because they got to fill that egg, make the eggshell. And the biggest difference there is just going to be the calcium, because that's a huge requirement. A bird needs 2 grams. 2 grams of calcium goes into every eggshell that's being made. So she has to eat about 4 grams of calcium a day to get that, so that she can get the 2 grams she needs for the eggshell, and then the other calcium that she needs for all of her other bodily functions. So calcium's important for the eggshell, but she still needs it for other things in there as well. So she's got to eat about 4 grams of calcium a day, and 2 of that goes towards the eggshell.
Interesting. Okay, so what you're saying is that basically your feed requirements when they're a chick is totally different because they're trying to grow. They're trying to produce as much energy as they can into muscles, and then it's more sustained. Is that kind of what you're shooting for with like a layer feed? They're not trying to grow, they're just trying to sustain and get just as much as they need to produce an egg.
Right. It's kind of like, I think, when you're young and growing, you're going to eat a whole lot more. You get to that teenage stage, you see those kids, they're just pounding the food and, they're doing fine. But as we get to our age, you start pounding the food like you did when you were 16, 17, 18. You start to, you know, your mass increases. And
Yeah.
so, those adult birds, like, they don't need to grow, get bigger. They need to maintain their body weight. They do have a little extra demand for that egg production because think of them kind of like an athlete almost. Like they're performing that, producing that egg is their 100-yard dash, if you will.
Interesting. So what risks are there if you're feeding a laying hen a chick feed?
Your only problem with doing that is egg production because a starter feed doesn't have the calcium that she needs to maintain egg production. So what you're going to find within a couple of days, like her egg production is going to taper off because she's going to burn through her body stores of calcium to keep egg production going. But within 2 or 3 days, like she's not going to have enough, and there's not enough calcium coming in to support that. Mm-hmm. Now that's assuming you're feeding them the non-medicated layer or starter feed. The medicated feed being fed to an adult bird is not great because that medication is not supposed to be fed to birds that are producing eggs for consumption. So, we want to make sure if you do have young birds eating medicated feed, that we don't have that where the adult birds can get it. But, for the most part, your hens aren't going to suffer much if you're feeding them a chick starter feed. You're just going to sacrifice egg production.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you mind on the medicated feed side of it? What would be some of the reasons that you would feed chicks a medicated feed?
All right, so you're going to feed. So the medication that is in Purina feeds is amprolium, which is a coccidiostat. So it's not an antibiotic. So it's not there for growth promotion purposes. It's really there. There's a parasite coccidiosis that birds are very susceptible to, especially when they're young. And that medication is there is to keep that parasite from kind of growing and overpopulating the bird and becoming a problem that could ultimately lead to the death of that bird. If not death, then it's probably going to stunt her growth, and then she's not going to be as great of an egg layer, or her life's going to be shortened. So that's what that medication is there for. It's really there to kind of keep coccidiosis from being a problem, so that all of the nutrition that we're putting into that chicken goes to making her grow larger and getting to that adult stage.
It's a preventative. There's no
it's a preventative. Yeah. And so, and it's not there if you do have an outbreak of coccidiosis, that's not a treatment for that.
Right.
That medication is there as a preventative, not as a treatment.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. At what age of those birds should you start looking at transitioning? You mentioned 18 weeks. Is that kind of standard? And then what does that process look like? Cold turkey, switch everything over, or how do you transition?
So typically we're going to keep birds 18 weeks is kind of our target date. That's typically when birds are going to transition from kind of a non-laying bird to a laying hen. It's around that phase. Now, some breeds may start to lay a little sooner. So we kind of always put that little caveat, it's 18 weeks or first egg, whichever comes first.
Okay. So it is breed specific. It's not necessarily a date thing. It's whatever the breed is when they start laying eggs.
Right. Yeah. Because not all breeds are going to start laying at the same eggs. Some of the better egg layers are going to start maybe 16, 17 weeks.
Yeah.
But then you're also going to find some of our prettier birds who aren't the great egg layers. Like they may not start laying until 20, 24 weeks. It might take them even longer to start laying eggs. So it's always kind of like when you're making that transition, kind of through puberty, if you will, for those birds, kind of put it in a human term, like it varies a little bit. Like they don't always happen at the same time, but 18 weeks is typically around that time that we target that. So if we make that transition in 18 weeks, and when you make that transition from the starter to the layer feed, you can do a slow transition where you start to mix the two together, and so that the birds can get adjusted to it. This is especially important if you're going, starter feed is a crumble, and then the layer feed can be crumbles or pellets. So if you were sticking with a layer crumble, then the transition from the starter feed to the layer feed is pretty seamless because the birds recognize that as the food form. But if you mix to a pellet or switch to a pellet, the birds may be a little reluctant at first to eat that pellet just because it's different than what they're used to. So it might take a little longer. So that's where we certainly, kind of mix the pellets and the crumbles together for a couple of weeks, the starter and the layer, so that the birds recognize it as feed, and then they slowly make that transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any visible signs that a chick isn't getting the nutrients that they need?
For just not getting the nutrition they need, if you see a bird who maybe isn't growing as fast as the rest of them, like there could be something going on there. You're looking for, things that, an unhealthy bird might look like, like maybe she's not as active. She's sitting down more often. She's not up roaming around. Those are really the big things, with specific nutrient deficiencies. You can see more things, sometimes it's a leg issue or it's a head issue. Those are very specific kind of vitamin and mineral deficiencies that pop up. Typically, we wouldn't expect to see that on one of our products because the feeds are providing all of those nutrients in the feed. But if you are feeding your birds kind of a variety of other things that aren't a complete feed, like those birds may develop some nutrient deficiencies because what you are offering them is probably not a complete feed providing all of the nutrients that she needs.
So you talked about some of the nutrient deficiencies. Let's talk about the reverse side of that. What is the downsides of just starting off right off the bat feeding your chicks a layer feed so that you don't have to transition?
So you want to, like, at hatch, you want to start feeding them layer feed?
Yeah. If someone was just thinking, oh, I'm gonna just skip the extras and I'm just gonna go right to the layer feed. I imagine there's a lot of negatives. What would we be
Right.
looking at?
Well, yeah. I mean, for one, that starter feed is designed with the vitamins, minerals, the amino acids that the bird needs to grow and develop. A layer feed isn't targeted quite to that level. So the birds aren't going to probably develop as quickly. And then the biggest issue is going to be just the overabundance of calcium that is in layer feed. That's going to be your biggest problem because they don't need that. This really goes for not just the young birds, it goes for male birds of any age. So male birds shouldn't be on a layer feed at all during their lives
Okay.
because what happens is they don't need that extra calcium, but they're eating it if they're eating a layer feed. So they've got to get rid of all that excess, and then all of that calcium has to get funneled through the kidneys to get out of the body, and then that's a lot of extra wear and tear on the kidneys, and that can lead to some kidney damage, some kidney failure, and really shorten the lifespan of your male birds. And if you're feeding chicks from the start layer feed, like they're just not going to grow and develop, and then you're really beating on those kidneys early, and it's
Stressing out
just
a
going to
young
shorten their
kidney.
lifespan.
Yeah. So a lot of people that are watching this are backyard poultry enthusiasts. I'm sure they've got roosters for some of the many benefits there. What do you recommend for roosters?
Yeah, I mean, so roosters should be, as they kind of make that transition to an adult, they're on that starter feed again till about 18 weeks. And then I would actually probably switch them to flock raiser.
Okay.
So it's a little higher protein feed, and it's a lower calcium feed as well. So that's going to give him the best nutrition.
Okay.
The problem is most people are probably housing their roosters and their hens together, and feeding them separately becomes a bit of a challenge. And
Sure.
it gets even more challenging if you have kind of bantam roosters and full size roosters, because now you've got a size difference. If they're all kind of the same size, roosters tend to be a little taller. So we can put maybe a feeder with flock raiser in it, and you set it up a little higher so that he can get to it, and then the hens will mostly ignore it.
I like that.
Yeah, but again, if you've got bantam roosters and full size roosters, that doesn't work as well because setting it up high, then the banties can't get to it. Your other option is to kind of feed everybody flock raiser and then put a supplemental feeder with oyster shell out there for the hens to get the calcium that they need. So birds are very good at eating to meet their nutrient requirements.
Yep.
And so if the hens need more calcium in their diet, they're going to go get the oyster shell and get that extra calcium that they need. And when they don't need it, they're just going to ignore it, which is why the roosters will most likely ignore that container of oyster shell. Now, the downside to that is you're relying on the birds to kind of regulate their intake of calcium. So if egg production is important to you and getting kind of as many eggs out of those hens as possible is something that, is your goal, like you're going to sacrifice that there.
Yeah.
But, with a lot of backyard hobby farmers, we find that they have more chickens and they end up with more eggs than they know what to do with. So maybe sacrificing a little egg production for the total overall nutrition of the flock might be the better option. So you kind of have to decide which one of those choices really works best for you, what your
Yeah.
goals are. with your flock.
I've got all kinds of videos on how to preserve extra eggs. So if you're out there and you're trying to get as many eggs as possible, just take my advice. What I like about the Purina feed is that I know that all the calcium's in there. Like I don't have to supplement any because I know that it's already included in the pearls, and so that's my personal favorite. I just like that because then I don't have to worry that they're getting any extra or too much. I just like that peace of mind.
Yeah.
That's just my personal opinion. There are a lot of different options. I mean, Purina has all kinds of different feeds. So what should people be looking for on labels to ensure that they're getting the right feed for their flock?
Well, you have to decide kind of what what you want for, maybe your birds, maybe your family, maybe the eggs you're getting. So kind of the biggest distinction is going to be whether it's kind of, I guess, traditional feed or if it's going to be organic feed, because that's where, people have very strong opinions on, organic or not organic. And I'm not here to tell you one is better than the other. We offer both of them. So if the organic lifestyle is your choice, we have that type of feed. The nutrition is really the same in both. There's still 16% protein to 3.5% calcium. The vitamins, the minerals, they're all the same. It's just the source of the ingredients that really separates that. So, that's the biggest one, whether you want to be organic or not. And so you make that decision, what works best for you. And then outside of that, so we've got in our Laina line, we've got Laina, then we've got Laina plus omega-3, which is an increased amount of omega-3 fatty acids in the feed. So that kind of increases the nutrition of the eggs. So when you eat the eggs, you're getting more nutrients, you're getting more omega-3 fatty acids in your own diet, which is for most of us is probably a good thing
Yeah.
to have. And then we've also have the Laina plus high protein. So we've incorporated black soldier fly larvae into the pellets. So you're getting a little more protein in the feed. It's elevated from 16%, which is majority of our layer feeds. This one has 19% protein in it. So you've got an increase in protein for those birds. So if you feel your birds need extra protein in their diet, that's a great way to do it, and it still balances all of the other nutrients in there for the feeds. That's also a good option if your birds are maybe part of the flock is going through a molt. You
Hmm.
got the extra protein there to kind of support those birds as they're laying eggs and regrowing feathers, or for the birds that are molting and not laying eggs, like they can get some nutrition that they need to regrow those feathers. But the birds that are still laying eggs, they can still get the extra calcium that they need for there. So it's got we're trying to fill a bunch of different niches with that
Yeah.
feed. So kind of whatever works in your situation, you might have that option to transition to it.
I like that. This would open up a whole can of worms. So we're not discussing necessarily broilers today, but I do want to at least ask that question. When it comes to broilers and layers at the same time, can you use a layer feed to feed broilers, or do they really just need their own specific feed?
Yeah, for when it comes to meat birds, they really need their own nutrition. Feeding a layer feed to those meat birds is not going to get you the results you want, because those birds, laying hens grow quickly. Broiler chicks grow even faster. You look at just in the first week of life, a layer chick is going to double in body size in that first week. A broiler chicken is going to get 3 times its size
Oh, wow.
in that same week. So it
Wow.
grows so quickly, and you think a broiler chicken, you can get that bird from it's like 30 grams uh, out of the egg, and you can get him to 6.5 pounds in 42 days on a feed. So that's it's something crazy. It's like a 64 times increase in body weight in 42
Wow.
days. So those birds grow really fast. So the meat bird diets tend to be higher in protein, higher in energy, higher in amino acids, a lot more nutrient dense, because we want those birds to grow quickly to get them to that market weight. Whereas with laying hens, we're growing them. It's 18 weeks to kind of get them to that stage. So there's a big difference in how those birds grow. And we want the laying hens to grow slowly so that they can develop the body size to lay eggs. We want those meat birds who are just voracious eaters to grow quickly so that we can stop feeding them and just adding to the cost of
Yeah.
raising meat birds.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of why I bring this up because I had tried that for a while. Like the first time I had broilers, just getting started was like, well, I've got this layer feed. I'll throw some of this in. And like you said, just didn't have the same results. And especially when you're looking at cost, like if the broiler feed is more expensive, I'm thinking, well, then I could just cut costs with some layer feed. But eventually, you're not going to end up with the same product, and so you're actually losing money. It makes more sense. Like, you guys have done all the research, you guys know what you're doing. This is the best way to ensure you're getting a good sized broiler at the end of the day.
And that's what we see a lot. A lot of times when you try to cut corners, it ends up costing you more in the long run
Yeah.
than it would if had you just gone with kind of the path that is really kind of that direct path.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys doing all that hard work for us. So I should just take your advice and not learn through all my failures. But
Well, sometimes that's what it takes. We
yeah,
got to
it
make the
does.
mistakes.
It does. Speaking of advice, do you have any final tips or words of wisdom advice for those that are backyard chicken owners when it comes to feed selection?
Well, obviously I'm biased, so I think, Purina is the best because, well, I mean, they're paying me and and I'm formulating it. But I will say, and joking aside, you're looking for a feed is complete, is going to provide the nutrition that those birds need. And I realize there are lots of options out there, and then we even get, differences in prices. You've got your premium products, you've got some economy things like, understand prices and, cost of feeding the birds is high. But you're going to find that even though the bag of feed, so Laina might be the most expensive bag there, but even if you go to a less expensive feed, what you're going to find is on that cheaper feed, the birds are probably going to be eating more of that feed.
Yep.
And they're going to be laying fewer eggs.
Yep.
So if you kind of work out what your cost per dozen eggs is, even though Laina may be a couple of dollars more a bag than maybe the cheaper product, you're going to find with the increase in production, you're going to get more eggs and they're going to eat more feed, and your cost per dozen is probably going to be even cheaper on that premium product. So,
Yep.
Kind of keep that in mind. I know it's hard to stand there at the shelf and go, well, this one's $4 more and this one's cheaper, and they're both layer feeds. Well, they're not all necessarily created equal. They may all be layer feeds, but there are reasons why this one is $4 more than that one, and not just because it has a checkerboard attached to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I went through that same thought process, and that's why I think it's really important to have this conversation, because when I'm sitting at the shelf first time owning chickens, like I didn't have, I didn't put in the time and effort to find these resources to get the answers. And so I just went with whatever was cheapest. And you're right, I absolutely fed way more feed because I wasn't just going with something that had quality and everything packed in that the birds need. So I appreciate that advice for sure. I appreciate you taking the time, and any other bits of wisdom that you have to share are always appreciated. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you guys learned as much as I did from that interview. If you still have questions about chicken feed, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them, or who knows, maybe we could have Dr. Biggs back on. Thank you to Purina for providing all this education, support for our farm, and we'll see you guys in the next video.